One of the cool things that we can do in RackForms is build a form that allows us to pluck some rows out of a database and then have our users quickly and easily update the values and save those changes back to the database table from where they came from. And there's two main ways that we can do that. The first is the automated way, and let's just put that here. So this is the automated way. This is the preferred way. It's easy, it's quick, and it's really full-featured as far as your users are concerned. And the way it works is very simple. I'm going to select on my builder page the repeater element that we've added, and under repeater SQL, I'm going to use my Visual Query Builder to add some columns from the select statement. One thing I want to point out here is we want to make sure that this select statement includes the primary auto-incremented field of that table. Just as a brief diversion, if you're not familiar with that, when we're building tables in MySQL and most other relational databases, one of the fields in the table that we create is going to be a primary key field that has an extra attribute of auto increment. And all this means is that whenever I add a row to this table, it's going to get a unique ID that basically increments by 1 traditionally for every row that we add. Therefore, every row that we have is going to have some unique identifier in it. And as you can see here, that's what this column is right here. Now, RackForms needs that information because when we perform the update, it's going to need some way to uniquely identify the row that we're trying to update. And that's why we want to have that primary auto-incremented field there. So as long as we have that, though, all we have to do is just click under Generate Template, Multi-Update, and it'll give us a form that looks like this right here. So we can change any of these values right here, and when I hit Update Records, it's going to update the form, and if you look at our database, it's going to update it in the database as well. So that's the automated way. It's so easy that it's almost really not worth showing. You just add a select statement and then click multi-update for your template. And RackForms literally takes care of everything else for us. What we want to focus on in this video is the more manual way of doing it. So this is the way that we're calling manually coded right here. Now, manually coded is not the recommended way because it is a lot more work. Well, relatively more work to get what we want. But it is a little bit more powerful because we can get into the specifics of the update statement that we issue. And it looks a little something like this. So I've added a second builder page to my form, and by default I get one of my repeaters. So I have one right here. And I'm basically going to do this. I'm going to take the same select statement that I had in this top one, and I'm doing that because, again, I want to make sure I have this auto increment field right here. And now instead of clicking Generate Template, I'm going to manage the template and the SQL manually. So let's start with the template. So go ahead and under Toggle Visual Template Editor, go ahead and click that. And then I'll click the Insert Template button. It's always located at the bottom right here. And I'm going to select from templates here one of our update templates. So 3-column update is usually a good starting point because as we're about to see, we can always modify this to fit our needs. Okay, now, speaking of modify to fit our needs, here I can see that I have an ID and name field, but I don't actually have the email field that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'm going to click into my table right here, and I'm going to right-click, and under column, I'm going to insert one after, and I'll just type in email right here. Now I'll need to add a token so that I can actually display that field. And by the way, just to kind of show you what this looks like right now, the template that we added is essentially giving us this, right? So it's displaying the ID, as a static value because we can't change that, but it's displaying the name as a text field and then an update record button. Now right now if I change something about this and press update record, it actually reverts back, right? It's not saving the change because we haven't actually written the SQL yet to actually manage that change. By the way, this is why we always suggest you use the automated way because why do you have to worry about SQL? But again, it's a little bit more powerful, so let's push on. So first things first, I want to display the email column in here. So how do we actually do that? Well, we use our token chooser. So I'm going to put my cursor, I want the token to appear, and because I want email to appear under the email header, it seems like a good place. And I'll go ahead and click the token chooser. Then if I want to make this an update field, I go down to the column, or the row, pardon me, where we have the email, and I would simply click update right here. And what this is going to do then is it's going to add a token that will show a text field where I can adjust that email. Now it is important to take a small diversion here to note that we can modify what these tokens actually display. So at any point I can click on a token and we're going to bring up the editor. And the editor then allows us to change things like, well, which field am I showing? So right now I'm showing the email field, but I could simply change this to be something else as long as it's included in my SQL statement. So for example, if I changed my SQL statement to include that age column, right? So you may recall we have age right here. If I actually change my SQL statement to include age, I could just change this to age right here. And now I actually display the age column. But in this case, though, we want to keep it at email. I can also do things like change the type of field that it is. So right now it's text box, but I could also change this to say select right here. And if it was select, this would then optionally show an array of values from some predetermined array. In this case, though, we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to keep it at a text box. We can change any of these values, though, and we notice here that we have under token mappings what these different fields are. So you can see here that in between these two pipes right here, I have the field, which corresponds to this, the type it is, text box, the data type, string. We have some size information, so the X size and Y size, so this is how long the column is. If this is email, I might want to make it a little bit wider. I can have a default value for it. I can have a values array. This is how we'd actually populate select items, checkboxes, and radio items, and so on. In this case, though, again, I'm just going to change my one X size just so the field's a little bit wider, and we'll go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, so it looks pretty good. Okay, so at this point now, I want to be able to update these records. So how do I actually do that? Well, this is where we're going to write some SQL now. So basically, I'm going to make sure my item is selected here, and I'm going to scroll down till we get to user updates mode. Now, right now, it's set to do not allow user updates. I'm going to change this to single row updates. Now, you may be curious, what is multi-row updates? Well, multi-row updates is reserved for when we use the automatic template generator. So generally speaking, we only want to select from this list single row updates. Now when I select that, then our UI changes a little bit, and we have two items right here. I have the update SQL, and I have the repeater variables that I want to use. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, well, what SQL will I need to write that's going to allow me to update the name and email fields? And I could basically do something like this. Now, I could write this by hand, but I actually prefer going into a database program like we have here and actually writing the statement here first, just so we can make sure the code actually works. So I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say update of the demo. And we're going to say set name equals question mark, email equals question mark. And let's just see if this statement runs right here. So right now, my question marks are, of course, creating a problem, but that's okay. Now let's see what happens here. So I've updated the entire table, and I've set name equal to blank and email to blank. And if you're any kind of database person, you may be raising an eyebrow right now, because that's going to be a horrible, horrible result for us. We've basically updated all rows, name and email, to be blank. So one of the first things that we need to fix, and by the way, let's just kind of redo some of our data here, is we want to make sure that we target a specific row. And this is a really nice demonstration of where this primary key field really comes into prominence. So let me just add one more row here, jsmith@aol.com. Okay, so we definitely don't want to zero out all of our rows again. So how do we actually fix this? Well, we fix it with what's called a where statement. So I'm going to say where ID equals some number. So if we actually look at our content right here, you can see that my record has an ID of 182. So technically, if I say where ID equals 182, well, now when I run this query, yeah, it's going to blank our values out, but it's only going to blank out my two values, right? So we're going to leave Joe Smith alone. So where clauses, incredibly important when it comes to this type of work. Now, we know that the statement works. We know that it's updating the database. We know it's writing blank values right now. And so how do we actually transform this into something that RackForms can use? Well, I'm basically just going to copy this verbatim into RackForms. We'll talk a little bit about what we need to change. So if we kind of look at this query now, the one thing that really stands out is instead of writing blank values to the database, we should probably be writing whatever the user's typed in here. And it actually doesn't matter what the value is there. We always replace variables with question marks in RackForms. Always, always, always. And the reason why we do that is this prevents what we call SQL injection. So nasty people might get into your server, and if you allow those users to write raw SQL and process raw SQL, there's a chance that they could inject extra SQL into those calls. If we do this though, that is, we use what we call placeholders and what we also call prepared statements, now we're not actually passing SQL, we're just passing values. And so you can basically think of these question marks right here as stand-ins for whatever the user is going to fill out in the form. And that goes for every dynamic piece of information that we have. Name is going to be dynamic, email is going to be dynamic, and even that ID is going to be dynamic as well. Okay, so that's half our statement right now. However, this still won't quite work because we do need to tell RackForms what in the heck these question marks actually stand for. And we do that using the update variable list right here. Now this is a little bit less code intensive. I know that I need the name, email, and ID fields from this guy right here. So I'm just going to click on dynamic variable picker. And again, I know that I need name, email, and ID. So I'm just going to click on those in that exact order. Name, email, ID. And behind the scenes here, I should say literally behind that guy right there, I've been adding those guys in just like this. Let's watch that one more time. Name, email, and ID. And this is just simply going to say, hey, the first question mark, it's going to get its value from the name field in the form. The second one is going to come from email, and the third one is going to come from the ID field. So I'm going to go ahead and run this then. And now we can see that I can add myself back into this form. And I can update this record, and now our values actually stick. Now, a quick pointer right here, you'll notice that I said now our values stick. I know this kind of happens fast, and especially in the video, it may not look like anything's actually happening. But what's actually happening here is if this wasn't working, as we saw at first, these values, whenever I hit update record, would actually get blanked out again. Whenever I hit update record, it's actually reloading this entire form. And so therefore, I know now that when I look at my FB demo table and refresh the data, I know that those two values are going to be there. So that then is a basic look at how our update forms work. Now it is of course important to mention a few items in closing. The first is this should always be taken incredibly cautiously. I know that's not proper English, but it's one of those things where as somebody who's been doing web development for many, many years, you almost get emotional about telling people to please be careful with this type of power. Basically, when we open a system up like this, we're giving the end user an incredible amount of power. So generally speaking, if you've built a form that allows people to grab information out of your database and update it, those should only be validated users. We should never give random people that ability. If you are giving random people that ability, hopefully you're only doing it in a read fashion, right? You're only allowing users to submit data to the database. You're not actually giving them the power to pull it out, view what existing records are, change them, and then submit those changes. And we do have ways of doing that in RackForms, specifically with our login forms. So if you load up one of these two guys right here, you can actually build a form that will allow a user to log in, and then you can use the code from that to say only valid users can touch this data right here. There's also a couple other things that we haven't really touched on right here, which is, for example, how do we actually pass information between these forms? We'll cover those in the next video in this series. But for now, hopefully this has kind of helped you to get started here when it comes to using update forms in RackForms.